Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. From the Arcadian Court in downtown Toronto, welcome to the Empire Club of Canada. For those of you just joining us through either our webcast or our podcast, welcome to the meeting. Before our distinguished speaker is introduced today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our head table guests. I would ask each guest to rise for a brief moment and be seated as your name is called, and I would ask the audience to refrain from applauding until all of the head table guests have been introduced. Our head table guests, Mr. Dominic Barton, our guest today, Global Managing Partner, McKinsey and Company. Mr. Victor Dodig, President and Chief Executive Officer, CIBC. Mr. Colin Lynch, Senior Vice President, Strategy and Growth at Greystone Managed Investments, Inc., and a Director of the Empire Club of Canada. Mr. Chris Halleck, Chief Executive Officer, Janssen. Mr. Jim Getz. Have I mispronounced your name? I'm sorry. Getz. Mr. Jim Getz, President, Canadian Beverage Association. Mr. Harry Seymour, Past President, Empire Club of Canada. Mr. Nahid Kurji, President and Chief Executive Officer, Cyclica, Inc. Ms. Nancy Barber, Vice President, Program Management, Global 7000-8000 Program, Bombardier Business Aircraft. Ms. Megan Boyle, Director of Public Affairs, Red Bull Canada, and Director, Empire Club of Canada. And Mr. Stefan Schmidt, Senior Director, Engineering and Methods, Bombardier Business Aircraft. I am Barbara Jessen, the President of Jessen & Company Communications and the President of the Empire Club of Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, your head table. In a world where the term consultant is sometimes a euphemism for looking for work, our guest today stands at the very pinnacle of professional excellence. I think we frequently forget that the service sector, in which his business plays such a seminal role, currently represents about 71% of Canadian GDP. The point I'm making is that our economy has seen a dramatic shift from natural resources and manufacturing, and the evolution in the sources of our productivity continues. Despite this, most people in Canada, I think, continue to believe that our biggest opportunities for development lie in manufacturing in the high-tech industries and our natural resources. Both, of course, are critically important, but it is something of a mystery to me that we continue to measure success in innovation only in patents for funding or funding for hard science and technology. Many countries in the world are making considerable progress into innovation in the service sector, changing their approach to create balance between technology R&D and service innovation. As a leader at the very highest echelons of the service sector and a key advisor to our government, I hope to learn from our guest speaker today some of his thoughts on how Canada's service economy can innovate and evolve for future growth. Here to introduce our guest speaker is Mr. Victor Dodig, President and Chief Executive Officer of CIBC.
Thank you, Barbara, and welcome everyone to the lunch. Welcome, Dominic, to Toronto. It's a real privilege and honor personally to be introducing Dominic. I've known him for almost 25 years. Coming out of business school, just before I graduated, I was interviewing at McKinsey and Company, and coming up from Harvard Business School and say, I want this job at McKinsey. And at McKinsey, you require unanimity from everyone that interviews you to say you're in. And I met Dominic. And I was like, Dominic is unique. He is unorthodox in his thinking. He's incredibly intelligent and incredibly self-effacing. And I recall the interview. He's like, why do you want this job? He almost threw me off my feet. And he has that way about him to make people think in a different way. And it's something that I've admired about you for a long, long time. It's been a consistent theme of yours. This ability to contribute and this ability to care. And while I never worked on a study with you together, you always, while I was there, and I was only there for 3 years, but they paint you with the McKinsey brush for the rest of your life, which is a good thing. You'd always pop in and say, how's it going? What can I help you with? What are you trying to solve for? And that's the type of person that you are. You are a caring, intelligent individual. I see you as Canada's gift to the world, and a great patriot of Canada. And we don't use the term patriot enough in our country. It's in our national anthem. But he's a patriot. He's an economic patriot. He cares deeply about our country. He has obviously done well in life. He's highly educated, a Rhodes Scholar. He joined McKinsey over 30 years ago. I think his notable accomplishments is when it wasn't in vogue, he went to Asia and he went to Korea and he went to China and built McKinsey's practice up into a significant force in that part of the world, which is now noted by everyone. The global managing partner of the firm, and I guess at some point soon you have to step down. The only thing about the McKinsey election process to global managing partner is it's probably almost as secretive as the papacy, right? In terms of who might it be. 4 people were mentioned in the Financial Times recently. I won't go there. I know one of them because I used to work with one of them when I was there, and a very smart person as well. I think when it comes to patriotism, Dominic's surely shown his stripes here for Canada in agreeing to chair the government's Economic Growth Council. It is something that we all need to be thinking about. How do we take the family business of what we've been endowed with, the natural resources of the past? How do we look to the future and the reshaping of technology and trade and open borders? And how do we make Canada stand not only as a political beacon in the world, but an economic beacon in the world? And there's no better person to address that topic today than my friend Dominic Barton, who's both a capitalist and a human with a social conscience. Well, I think you'll see all of that come through as he talks about the long term and the necessary patience to build the country that we want. Welcome to Toronto, Dominic.
I think we're done. I think I'm just going to, Victor, you're wonderful. You can see one of my many mistakes was not being able to retain Victor in McKinsey. It was very difficult to try and hire him because there were so many people that wanted him, and then to retain him. But it's an honor to be introduced by you. It's wonderful to be here. And what I was planning to do is just for 20 minutes or so go. Unfortunately, I have some slides, so I apologize for that up front, but that's just the way I try to make sure I'm on message with communication, just in terms of where we are, and then if there's time, any questions or input. I also want to recognize my Growth Council colleague, Ilse. If you could stand up. I know you don't like to. Ilse is here as well. She is just like the rest of the team. It's an amazing team, and has been pretty intense, I guess, I'd say, for the last 18 months or so, but just the commitment to try and find ideas and to leverage the great ideas that are already out there to move it forward. And so Ilse will throw a glass at me if I go off-piste on this or intervene, or I may ask her to. So I just wanted to go through this fairly quickly on it, but the bottom line is a little what Victor was saying about we have this incredible endowment, which we do with our resources, but also with our talent and with the size of the country that we are and our positioning in the world, literally geographic positioning, that we better use it or lose it. But we're going to have to do some things that can't be done overnight to be able to position ourselves to do that. And so what we've focused on is what are some long-term shifts that we can do to ensure that, in a sense, this is Canada's century as we go ahead, and we can do it because we've got all the ingredients. And my thought experiment, personally, I always do all the time from living in Korea, is imagine if Korea owned Canada, what they would do with it. And what that country's done with practically nothing is unbelievable. And if we just put a bit of that ambition into the system, I think we can really move the needle. So just 3 quick parts, just the context. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because I think you know it better than I do. The recommendations to date, and then what we're literally working on right now is our next wave of them. We're basically are focusing on business investment and skilling, which we think are 2 critical topics. I'd say also probably spent more time on this one than the previous ones just because of the complexity of it and so forth. But we'll take you through the sort of the findings on that. I think, again, we have many strengths. I'm not going to walk through them. In terms of the challenges, there's one in particular I want to point to, which is around the aging population. This is the one that worries us the most, the demographics, because we've been blessed for the last 50 years with a fairly young population, with women coming into the workforce, with immigration. But that tailwind is now becoming a headwind as we look at the next 50 years. And then we have a fundamental productivity challenge that we've had for quite some time. And I think there are some excuses we can use in that we're, a small population spread across a wide geography. But in today's world with technology, we can't use that excuse anymore. There's some things we need to think about on that front. But for the most part, we are incredibly blessed with what we've got to be able to win, we think, in this new world. The challenge, just to put out there, is again, this the aging population. Productivity growth really comes from labor force participation and the productivity of that labor force. We always underplay the importance of the size of the labor force, and that's been a big chunk of what we've seen in terms of our productivity growth over the last 50 years. And we're going to see a very significant drop if we don't do anything, so that we've got a headwind coming our way, which is a imperative. And the problem with these headwinds is they don't come overnight. It's a bit like the boiling frog, right? And it's hard politically to deal with that, because it can be someone else's problem all the time. We can kick this can down the road. The problem is if we do that for too long, we're going to really hit a wall. Just to put ourselves in comparison, we always think about Japan and Korea and all of these parts. Japan's already gone over the cliff. I mean, they're already dealing with this. But if you think about sort of our peer group countries that are out here, we are going to be more affected than anyone else that's out there. If you look at France, Germany, I mean, this is a particularly difficult issue for us as we go through it. And again, another way to look at it is working age to retired Canadians. Just look at those ratios: 7-to-1, 4-to-1, 2-to-1. That's not viable, right? And now, hopefully, with automation, there's going to be some strengths that we're going to get benefits from that. But having workforce participation is something that's going to be very important as we go through it. With the technology shift that's going on, I'm not a Luddite. I actually feel positive about the new jobs that will be created. What we're worried about on the council, and this is an area that Ilse and Michael Sabia have been really pushing hard on, is are our educational systems ready for the scale and the speed with which we're going to have to retool ourselves? And it's particularly for mature people, if I might say. It's a polite way of saying older people. This isn't going to be just about the young people coming through the system. It's the 40 to 55-year-olds. And this is going to be happening around the world, where some people are beginning to experiment, but we don't think anyone's really addressed this. And it's an order of like what pension reform was over 100 years ago, the idea that maybe you need to support people after they stop working. We're going to need something of that size to deal with it. We also, as we did our sort of diagnostic, if you will, about where Canada is based on a lot of work from others, we did spend a bit of time looking at where are the tailwinds or the shifts that are going on. And that, Victor mentioned it, Asia is a very big source of growth and opportunity for Canada. We are not participating anywhere near how we should on that side. But this is going to be net very, very good for Canada. The technology disruption, we're all technology companies now. This is going to increase over time. We already think it's significant now. But I think as Larry Summers says, we're in chapter 1 of a 100-chapter book. And for those of you who think about this a lot, I would say chapter 1's been pretty exciting. And wait till we see where it moves. And this is what I think is the single biggest force that's out there. The aging population, very significant for us, but also for the world as we go through it. And then this notion of people searching for a new societal deal. It's a bit of a combination of these forces, but there are a lot of people that are not benefiting. In fact, they're losing from all of these shifts and transitions that are going on. And they don't quite know why, but they're not happy about it. And this is where we're seeing the populism and so forth. And the trends are, with all of these shifts, that will get worse before it gets better unless we deal with it. And as far as I can see, there's no one who's accountable for doing that. We can't sort of say, government, that's your problem, or multilateral, that's your problem. We all have a role to play in that, because if we don't fix that system properly, we're all going to pay the price of it. And I don't think we have a lot of time on that front. So those are some of the forces that informed us as we looked at what we were doing. Again, opportunities. We're going to have a $20 trillion of annual consumption, primarily from Asia by 2030, just to satisfy those consumers on basic consumer needs. You're going to have to build 73 Procter & Gamble's just in that region to do it. So this is a very big opportunity. Whether you're participating in that market or supplying it, it's going to be critical to what you do. Natural resources. While we think about our services and the technology which we think are critical, let's not lose the sight of the fact that we actually are endowed with very important natural resources for the future, especially in ag food, which has been an area we've been focused on. There's that PwC statistic that over the next 30 years we're going to have to basically produce as much food as we have produced over the last 10,000 years combined. That just to give you a sense of the scale of what we have to do. And having safe, high-quality food, protein, is going to be a very, very important business. And it is kind of surprising to me there is not a single Canadian company that is a global champion in that sector. The Netherlands has more than we've ever had in that sector. And this is an area where I think it's an opportunity for us, like in many of the other places. Education, this we think is going to become one of the biggest actual businesses over time, given all the changes that are going on. I always remind people, again, for Australia, it's their third largest export, education, primarily post-secondary education. Tourism, 110 million outbound travelers from China. When you actually look at the statistics on what people like, where they want to go, one of the top 2 places in the world all the time is Canada, but they're not sort of participating like they could. And I think it's, again, big business opportunities. And then technology and innovation. So these are what we tried to do is, again, when we're thinking about the ideas, just inform ourselves on where, if you will, are the opportunity pools for our country. We set a target of we wanted to improve median income, household incomes by $15,000 a year above the trend line, right? And we use this just because we don't just want to throw up ideas. We want to have some target, because what we did when we looked at a lot of other reports that have been done, and there's some amazing thinking. One in particular, remember, also we looked at, there was a Porter Commission work that was done, I think, in 1992, just really big insights and views. One of the challenges, I think, is there were so many recommendations, like 350. It's difficult to absorb that. So we were saying, let's set a target and force ourselves to prioritize on a few that are going to actually move the dial. We wanted it also to be inclusive. This is something that Bill Morneau really hammered on us. He said it's very easy to get GDP growth and have that just go to the top 1%. We're not that interested in that. We want that too, but we make sure the median income also sees that. We decided in our group early on we wanted to have basically less than 12. We thought there's no rhyme or reason. We just thought 12, a dozen is a good number, but we didn't want to have any more than that, to just focus the prioritization through it. And we wanted to focus as much as we can on the implementation. How could we get the government or other people to digest this? And so that became part of the focus of it. And then we thought we would, this is really a Mark Wiseman view, we should release the recommendations in waves like hockey cards. There's sort of the notion of let's absorb them and then see what happens and learn as we go through. And again, drawing on a huge amount of really good thinking that's already out there. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So that was kind of the approach that we were taking. Is this speed okay? Good. Yeah. So let me just go through. There's 8 recommendations that we've put in, and we're now doing our last 2 buckets. I don't know whether it'll end up being 3 or 5 within that, but these are the first 8. One was the infrastructure bank and strategy. This was mainly driven by two reasons. One is we have about a $500 billion infrastructure gap in Canada when you think about our port facilities, our rail capacity, our pipelines, our technology infrastructure, the digital platforms that we need out there. And we know that infrastructure is one of the single most powerful ways to drive productivity in a country in the short term and the long term. And we have a lot of amazing pension funds, but they're investing a lot more in places like Chile and Brazil and Australia and the UK and not here. And how can we leverage more private capital to go after that $500 billion bogey? So that was one. And that now that the legislation went through, it's the first infrastructure bank in the world. And I commend the government actually in pushing that through, because politically that's difficult when you have governments like to do infrastructure, because it's helpful in politics of where you build certain facilities. And we were trying to say there has to be some independence to this. We need infrastructure that's going to drive productivity, not vote getting in the system. An FDI agency. Canada, when we compared ourselves to our peers, it punches way below our weight in terms of being a place where people like to invest, right, and come in for foreigners, mainly because people don't know what it is they can invest in. They don't know who to go to. It's complicated with the provinces. And we think that there's a very significant opportunity. And this isn't about foreign capital coming in to take over Canadian companies. It's actually to invest in Canadian companies, to invest in startups, to invest in R&D that's going on in universities. It's the broadest range of investment. Immigration. This is one we felt very strongly about. We felt that we needed to make it much easier for high-skilled talent to come in. It is too painful for a lot of corporates in Canada to be able to get the talent that they want. And a lot of people decide on where they set up headquarters by how easy it is to do it. And obviously with what's going on in the U.S., we have an advantage that we should lever on that side. But we also were pretty aggressive in terms of we wanted to crank up the economic immigration from 300,000 to 450,000 over a 5-year period, because we think we're going to need we're going to need more workforce participation through it. Innovation was a very significant part of our last set of recommendations. There were a bunch of pieces on this. One was really around, again, making sure we can get the talent here. We talked about innovation marketplaces, which were ways to get clusters of capabilities, universities, small businesses, venture capitalists, large corporates, all working together to be able to drive commercialization and innovation. The government has called them superclusters. The thing we just want to keep emphasizing, and we're excited by what they're doing on superclusters, is make sure we don't lose the marketplace notion. There has to be private capital that's driving it, not public capital in where it is. But we're excited by the 9 finalists that are in the system. The growth capital pools, we found a very big gap. Canada's actually extremely good at innovation. We're literally one of the top 3 countries in the world on almost every category in terms of idea generation. We've got wonderful research, but we're very poor at commercializing it. I know Ian Bendin's here, who does a lot on the venture capital angel investing side. But one critical area was the growth fund. And I want to thank Victor. He doesn't like to take credit for these, but with the banks getting together to provide that capital for small institutions, and there's now a CEO and a chair, and that's actually moving with $500 million, could go up to $1 billion, I think it is, Victor. And so there's a number of different areas in here. The other one is strategic procurement. The Canadian government, it does not like to be a first buyer, and that's actually really important for innovators when they move through it. In the US and the UK, this is done all the time. So there's a range of things on innovation that we felt were important. Future skills, I'll come back to this. This is because the world's changing so quickly, we need some signaling device to know what those future skills are going to be, and a way to experiment with new ways of training and reskilling people that we can use as we move ahead. So it's a bit of a chip in a broader process. Sector growth, as I mentioned, with the endowment, we saw at least 8 sectors where we think Canada should be punching way higher than our weight. These are the ag food, the clean tech, health care, and life sciences. This is a way untapped sector for us. It's a huge source of growth, and we're not doing. And this isn't about subsidies. This isn't about the government picking winners. There was a real body reaction to that type of thing. It was more saying, let's put a spotlight on an area where we know by any reasonable benchmark we should be doing much, much more. Why are we not? Are there regulations that are getting in the way? Are we not bringing all the resources that we need to? Or are we just not being ambitious enough? Are people not seeing it? And one of the things I'd just say here is the government's now called these economic tables. They've set up 6 of them, and they're moving. One of them is on ag food, which Murad Al-Khatib is doing, and I was pleasantly surprised. I saw him in Vancouver earlier this week, and he said that we said that there's at least a $40 billion jump that we can see in terms of the sort of performance in that sector. And he was saying, we think you're lowballing it. We think it's actually higher than that. And that's exactly what we want to have, is people who are in the industry, if you will, who are looking at it and saying, what is it that we need to be able to get there? So I think we've actually lowballed the potential, and that there's a lot we can do there for growth and jobs. Workforce participation, as I mentioned, we've plateaued on women. We had a good push, but it's flattened, and we need to crank it up again and make it easier for women to be able to participate. Indigenous people, we need to make that work. That's a huge source of talent if we can make it work. And it's not easy, but there's an economic prerogative to do it, not just a moral prerogative to go it. And Canadians over 55, and the government wasn't so excited about us trying to reverse the pension age reform, but we think we're going to have to get more comfortable with older people working, given life expectancy and where we are. And then the global trading hub, this is the notion of we are so focused on North America, and that's great, and we've got to do everything we can to try and continue that, and we all know about NAFTA, but the fact that we are so puny in these massive growth markets is just unacceptable for the future, and that's what we've said. We've got to have a free trade agreement with China, India, and Japan. We've got to move on that front to be able to have the access to those markets, and we're lagging our peers on that. I'm not going to go through all these. We've actually been monitoring the implementation of this. The only thing I'd say on the infrastructure bank, we just want to make sure, again, that they pay people market rates. It doesn't become these are really critical institutions. You got to pay market rates. We also want to make sure the governance is independent. We're excited. We have Jim Leach is a special advisor to the Prime Minister. I think he too is being paid a loonie a year, but he's a tough son of a bitch in there, and I'm glad he's there because he keeps, he has the standards of what he looks. The FDI agency is moving along very well in terms of the people. The immigration, the government didn't go to 450,000. I think a number of people in Canada probably are grateful that they didn't go to our number on that side, but we actually think that it's quite important in how we integrate people and move it through. Innovation, for the sake of time, I don't want to go through all of these here. The one I want to finish off is the last two, which is where we're working at now, which is on business investment, where there is a very tight linkage between business investment and GDP per capita growth, productivity growth. And what we found is in Canada, we are underinvesting compared to the U.S. and actually to a lot of our peers, especially when you put Australia on that system. We're investing less. We're investing less in capital, but we're also investing less in training for people. And we think that's something that we need to. Now, this area has been studied by everyone. So we're saying, well, what value are we going to add to this? Our view is let's look to the future, not to the past. Because there's going to be many growth engines, again, like life sciences, healthcare, ag food. What's getting in the way? And we think that in this case, regulation actually gets in the way. You think about the innovation potential in healthcare because of the data that we collect on our populations, which is unique. And Australia and the UK have that, but it's unique. The amount of innovation and commercialization that could be done is phenomenal, but we have a very rigid, too tough system to be able to deal with that. And so we're saying we've got to have regulation that's will protect people, but it's got to be more flexible, way more flexible. It's got to have a different mindset. And we've seen it in fintech. I mean, it's fintech, I would argue, if you look at the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the central bank, the only communications I get from them are about fintech investments and how they've got the regulatory sandboxes, and they want to try and encourage, the sort of players that are the large players that are in the country and the startups to be able to try things without fear of going to jail because they may break some particular rule and where it is. And so we're focusing a lot on what are the future businesses that could be grown and what is getting in the way of that as we go through it. In looking at we've many roundtables and discussions with business leaders. 3 challenges people raise. One is costs. Actually, the cost of input being a big issue. It's hard for us, I think, to be able to deal with things like construction costs. But regulation and taxes come up as very significant challenges as we go through it. Again, for the sake of time, going to skip through. We think life sciences and healthcare have a tremendous opportunity for us, but our regulatory system gets in the way of that. We're looking to the past, not to the future in where it is. We're also looking at tax. And again, we're a bit nervous about delving into tax given what the government's been going through in the last little while. But again, we're taking a view that, last time a major review of the tax system was done was the Carter Review, right, Ilse, which I think was over 30 years ago. So there are actually a number of things that relate to software, IP, we lag. We're not future looking, and we want to make sure that tax system is future looking, because there's disincentives for ICT and software compared to other countries, and it's also got to be competitive. So we're looking at what's going on in the U.S., and we have to respond. If the U.S. does something dramatic, we just can't sit there and go, well, I guess that's Donald Trump. And we've got to be competitive. We've got to be competitive on the corporate tax rate, and we've got to be competitive on the personal. That's what we're saying. And again, I don't know how the government will feel about it, but that we think we have to look at that as we look ahead. And then the skills is the other one I mentioned. This is an area that we think is it's one of the biggest issues of our time, and too little is being done on it. And given the scale of the number of people that need to be reskilled over the next 15 years, we got to get working on it now, or we're going to have a very big problem. We think somewhere in the order of 2 to 3 million Canadians and they'll be typically aged as somewhere between 40 and 50, who will be out of work if they aren't reskilled properly. And that, when you think about inclusive growth and so forth, it can't happen. And what we're going to find is there are many unfilled jobs because we don't have the skills to do it, but we don't have the system to move it. And we do already have a sense of where the growth is, because there are a lot more new jobs in some skill categories, but there are also a lot of jobs that are in declining categories, and we could spend a whole luncheon just on the skilling side. But I'm just saying it's a very big issue, and we're worried, and so we're spending a lot of time on that. We actually think that what we've had is basically 2 pillars: an education system and an unemployment system to be able to deal with this. And this is something again that Ilse and Michael Sabia have been pushing, and the notion that we need a 3rd pillar, which is around reskilling, and it has to be at a scale that is way more significant than we've seen before for us to be able to go through it. And again, governments are having to think very differently about what this means, because we don't think it's tinkering with existing systems or plans, and corporates need to do this. Germany's got a very good set of programs. They're piloting in 3 of their employment agencies, where it used to be about unemployment. Now people go there to get advice on what sort of skills may be happening down the road and where do I fit and what I can do. Very popular. A lot of people are participating in it. We think we need to do that probably in Canada as well, too, with our employment centers. So it's reskilling the employment centers for what we need to do. Singapore has done something. They're very worried about this. They're obviously much smaller, so they can do things more dramatically. But they've, in fact, one example, they've set up a lifetime education account that every Singaporean citizen over the age of 25 gets, and you get 500 Singapore dollars, and it's topped up every time you use it. But it's only to be used for courses that they think are fit what the future is going to look like. And again, so there's experiments that are going on, but we think it has to be done at a different scale. So that I probably talked for too long here, but I hope that just gives a bit of a picture of the things we're doing. There's 8 that are in. We're literally finalizing the last 2 buckets, which are around the investment, which will be around regulation and taxation, and then around the skilling, which is how do we basically ensure we have incentives for employers, employees, and the government to spend the money that we need to, and we think it's sort of, I guess, probably 7 times also what the number is today in terms of order of magnitude that's going to be required. So I don't know if there's any time for questions, but I'll show. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Great talk. One quick question on the reskilling. Where do universities play in that equation on reskilling? I noticed the mention on government agencies, but I'd be curious as to how big or small of a role you think our post-secondary education system play.
Sure. Do you want me to maybe take a couple at one time? Then I can avoid some questions. I find it's a good way of doing it. Yeah. Go. Yeah. That's a good. I'm not going to avoid it, but yeah.
Oh, there's one. Just
You mentioned a lot about agri-food and Canada being well positioned. Just with water and how you see that as a potential either opportunity or constraint.
Yeah. Great. Maybe one more.
You also mentioned the idea that often government procurement isn't ideal as a first procurer, and that can happen both at the federal and the provincial level. How are you working on making sure that all levels of government are on board with a lot of these ideas?
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'll try to start if I do these, and then on university, it's a great question. I mean, I think that obviously universities play a critical role, but I think we need. Universities are going to have to change some of the things they do, and I think there's got to be a little more of a tighter linkage between what sort of skills are being developed and the types of jobs, but we also reflect that universities are also there for the long term, the research that goes on. I don't think we want to tinker or mess with that. We are emphasizing more on polytechnics, which I think could play. We in Canada don't, I think, give enough. We have a cultural sort of aversion that if your kid goes to a polytechnic, they're somehow not, it's a very different model than what you see in Germany or Switzerland. So we think we need to shift the community colleges. The polytechnics play a really important role in providing very practical, timely skills. And the third aspect is we have to change the way we do it, much more modular. You know, people in this world are not going to be able to go away for 3 years to reskill, especially when you're in your 40s, you have a mortgage, you've got a family. It's got to be part-time. It's got to be affordable. It's probably going to have more online. And we're seeing some amazing examples. AT&T has done this. Again, a hardcore capitalist, but Randall Stephenson is spending $250 million a year reskilling. And he's done it with a university, Georgia Tech, with an internet education provider, Udacity. And then he provides part-time. It's sort of like 2-3 hours a week, and you get a medallion. It's not a degree. It's a medallion, and if you get the right number of medallions, you get the job, right? And those medallions are now being accepted by other companies. For example, McKinsey. If you have a AT&T medallion in digital design, we'll hire you. I don't care what university you went to, if you know what I mean. So that's the sort of changes I think that we're going to have to look at. I think it also has implications for K-12. That's provincial, that's beyond our jurisdiction, if you will. But I think someone's got to raise it, because the idea that we teach people the same way we've been teaching people for the last 50 years as we look ahead is probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But those institutions are quite challenging to change, I think. But so we think the education side is really important. But we also think businesses need to step up more and train, and looking at what are some incentives we can provide for that for people. On ag, food, and water, I think that's one of our biggest endowments, if I might say, because if you actually look at ag food and where it's being produced in the world today, and you look at one of our biggest competitors is Australia, and I'm not a deep expert in this, but what I understand is the way that Australia gets its water is quite different than the way we get it, and their way of getting water is not going to last for very long, right? It's a bit like California. And the countries that have a natural endowment in water, the three biggest are four. There's four of them. It's Canada, it's Brazil, it's Kazakhstan, and it's Ethiopia, right? And in my view, Brazil was one of the, if you look at the global champions in food, you see a lot of Brazilian companies, Brazil Foods being an example. What they're basically doing is exporting their water via chickens, right? That's how they convert water into chicken, and then they export it to the Middle East and other places like that. And I think that's a big advantage, but when you actually look at how we use water, we're one of the biggest wasters of water in the world, probably because of the abundance of it. So I think it's a very big opportunity for us. And on the question there, as you said, with procurement, what we're trying to do, recognizing we can't, tell the provinces, I think it's almost like if we did, they do the opposite or something like that. That's sort of so what we're trying to do is say, can it be kind of a race for the top? Can the federal government even, provide an incentive for those provinces that do the following thing? We will encourage them in some way. I also think what we found through this process, the regional set of ideas that are coming through are really exciting. So in British Columbia and Atlantic Canada, on the prairies, there's actually quite a lot of, we haven't found people in the provinces that are saying, this is crazy, why are you doing it? But I think you've got to make sure you've got the local group of leaders that are there, because in Atlantic Canada it's quite different obviously than what they're dealing with in Saskatchewan. But there is this sense of maybe we do need to be more supportive of people. So I think let's start. Hopefully the federal government can get going on this and start to do it, and that becomes a role model. There's been a sense here that's almost illegal. It's strange. It's even with our trade negotiations. Will that affect us? Well, again, the U.S. has been doing this for decades. The UK has been doing this for a long time. So we just have to get modern, I think, on that. Is there time for you?
There's been a lot of discussion about our seeming inability to grow and sustain global champions. How much do you think we should pay attention to that versus other, broader growth initiatives?
Well, I don't think it should be the single focus at all, but I do think it's a component, because when you do have, large companies help a lot of small companies. It's in the supply chain. One example, when I was living in China, I was always amazed at how when the German companies would come over, so you'd have, the chancellor would come, and then there would be 10 big German companies, the ones you'd expect, but they had to bring their supply chain with them. So they were bringing with them a small set of companies as well, because those companies could not afford, if you will, to go and get introduced to the China market. And I think if you think about where a lot of R&D is done, there's a lot in startups which we need to do. We have to have the breadth of it, but large companies do a lot on that side too. And actually being part of global supply chains is critical in where things are. So I don't think it should be the sole focus at all, but it's got to be a component. I think it's an indicator. And for me personally, when I look at it, I see these 6 or 8 sectors where we have a natural advantage, and the fact that there isn't I think we've gone from having 23 global champions to 5 over the last 20 years. It's unnecessary. And again, it's not to try and say we need a government policy to do it. That'd be the last thing I would say. It's just more about the ambition around it. But as we said on the innovation, we want to get a lot better at commercializing our good ideas. And that's why, again, with the Business Growth Fund, with venture capital and angel investors, that we kind of get that flywheel working. That will also allow us to be able to create more of those companies. And I also think the trade element. I mean, it's going to be hard to be a global champion if you're not linked to Asia. I just don't know how. Doesn't mean you have to move there, but you better have a set of relationships with that part of the world, or you're going to be irrelevant, I think, is what we think. Ilse, I don't know if you want to correct anything that I've said. Okay, thank you.
Please welcome Chris Halleck to thank our speaker.
Thanks, Barbara. Good afternoon. I'm Chris Halleck. I'm from Janssen, Canada. Janssen, Canada is the pharmaceutical company of Johnson & Johnson. I just got a couple of remarks to make. As a new year approaches, it's important for us to be able to take some time and actually take a look and understand what kind of lies ahead of us. And I think today was very timely with regards to the Empire Club and Dominic being here today to talk to us about what Canada needs as we end up moving forward. So Dominic, on behalf of everybody here, I do want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and your advice. I think your international experience and the role as advisor for many of the global business and political leaders really does give you some great insight into the challenges. And so I was struck by a number of the comments that you made, really appreciated your four forces transforming the global landscape and the opportunities that were around those. I also looked and thought your recommendations, the 8 of them were great, but particularly as it related to foreign investment, the opportunity that was there, innovation as it ends up moving forward, and unleash the sector growth, because I do totally agree with you that healthcare is a huge opportunity as we end up moving forward. As the world's largest healthcare company, J&J looks for opportunities and conditions that will actually spur that growth as we move forward. And for life sciences, Canada, I think, is a wonderful opportunity. Janssen Canada and J&J has committed more than $1 billion in initiatives over the last little while, which I think is great. Most of those have happened right here in Ontario. And I think a real shining example of that is J-Labs at Toronto. For those of you who don't know, this was opened up in Ilse's building back in 2016. And it's really an incubator to help life sciences organizations to come up with new ideas, to grow their business, to move things ahead. And currently, J-Labs at Toronto has some 48 startup companies. 43 of those are here from Canada, 5 from the U.S., and really it's an opportunity for those companies to be able to pursue opportunities in life sciences as opposed to ending up south of the border. Those companies really benefit from what's happening now in our economy today. We have one company that's here with us today. So we have Nahid Kurji, president of Cyclica company here. He's working in the biophysics area and artificial intelligence to help pharmaceutical companies be able to navigate drug discovery pipeline as it moves forward. But he's just one of the 48 other companies that are actually out there. And I think J-Labs is a great example of the success that can actually take place with regards to the partnerships that have to happen out there, particularly as it relates to government, relates to research, relates to industry, relates to academia as well. And you referred previously in your discussion about what's actually getting in our way as we move forward. And I think one of the most important things is to ensure that that partnership takes place right across the spectrum. So between governments, between industry, between research, and all the other opportunities. And I think those are some of the things that we're going to have to remove. We also have to make sure that governments aren't getting in their own way of whether they happen to be regional or whether they're just happening between ministries themselves in terms of what they're actually impacting. So I think it's important that government and industry continue to get this right as we move forward. I think life sciences is a great example of that as we end up moving on. Economic growth is certainly an opportunity in this particular area, and I think that you highlighted it extremely well. So in closing, I'd just like to thank the Empire Club once again for hosting today's event, and a very special thank you to Dominic from McKinsey for his excellent insights on terms of how Canada can grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And a sincere thank you to our generous sponsors, CIBC, Janssen, Bombardier, and the Canadian Beverage Association for making this event possible. Without sponsors like these great organizations, the Empire Club lunches would not be possible. So thank you once again for your very generous support. We would like... We would also like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, for webcasting today's event for thousands of viewers around the world. And although our club has been around since 1903, we have moved into the 21st century and are active on social media. You can find us on Twitter at empire_club and visit us online at www.empireclub.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Finally, please join us again soon at our next event on November 20th. Rachel Notley, the Premier of Alberta, will be here with us at the Royal York Hotel. Thank you for your attendance, and this meeting is now adjourned.
So we'll see some